This episode is brought to you by Summer School Electronics. With pedals like the Snow Day Delay, the Pep Rally Fuzz, the Trash Panda, and my personal favorite, the Science Fair, which is two classic dirt pedals in one, with a mid-boosted overdrive on one side, a black lab rat circuit on the other, and a blend knob to blend between them to find the perfect classic stacked dirt sound you're looking for, it's hard not to find something you'll love. Mark builds all of his pedals by hand in Syracuse, New York, where he also works as a full-time educator. In addition to the super fun graphics on their pedals, Mark also offers custom artwork. Want your dog's face on a pedal? He can do it. Want your face on a pedal? He can make that happen too. Go over to summerschoolelectronics.com and make sure to tell him that 40 Watt Podcast sent you. Here we go.
All right.
All right, y'all. Welcome to another episode of the 40 Watt Podcast, where I try to talk to a bunch of musicians, instrument makers, amp makers, everyone in the music scene, especially here in the South. Try to focus a whole bunch of Southern musicians that maybe y'all haven't heard about, but you really should be listening to. I'm real pumped today. Got a buddy of mine that, honestly, I haven't talked to him in forever till I hit him up on Facebook, and I was like, hey, dude, you want to record an episode? Buddy of mine, Eric Deaton. Eric, you still play with the Eric Deaton Trio, is that correct?
That's right.
All right, and actually, I first met Eric when he was playing second. Actually, you may have been playing bass at the time for Jimbo. Is that right?
Yeah, I was mostly playing bass. I mean, you might have seen me playing second guitar here or there, but most of the times I was bass and with Jimbo Mathus and Knock Down South.
Yeah, dude. So I tell you what, I'm fairly familiar with you, but I'm not familiar with like how you got into music, like the early. What did little Eric Deaton look like when he first picked up guitar? How'd you get started?
Man, I got my first guitar when I was 13, and I'm from North Carolina originally. That's where I grew up, and when I first got the guitar, I was really into a lot of called classic rock now, Stones and Led Zeppelin and the Allman Brothers and things like that, and pretty quickly followed my favorite bands back to their blues roots. And within about a year, by the time I was about 14, I was almost exclusively listening to and trying to learn to play blues. And I had a great guitar teacher back in those days, Auerbach, and he got me going really good, and got me started, and when I was about 15, I discovered that there was still like a real thriving blues scene in Mississippi, and this was in like the early 1990s, and I decided right then that when I graduated high school, I was going to have to move to Mississippi and just hang out with as many bluesmen as would put up with me and learn as much as I could, And so when I moved here, I came straight to the hill country. Junior Kimbrough and R.L. Burnside were just really hitting it strong at that time, and all of their kids, their sons and grandsons, and the scene at Junior Kimbrough's juke joint at that time was just really amazing. So I started going out to Junior's every Sunday night and sitting in with Junior, with David Kimbrough, with R.L. when he was in town, Dwayne Burnside, and just really got the apprenticeship of a lifetime playing with those guys and soaking all of that music up. And that's kind of the background. And then from there, started in my early 20s, started hitting the road with some of the other Fat Possum guys, went out with T. Model Ford and Paul Wine Jones, and toured all around the country with them, and went overseas with Paul. And then a few years after that was when I got into Knock Down South, which then was when we met, and was playing bass and touring all over with Jimbo.
Man, that's crazy. So I knew you're from North Carolina, but I didn't know you specifically moved to Mississippi because that's where that blues scene was that you wanted to be a part of. That's pretty cool.
That was exactly what I did. Yeah. That to me, there was nothing else more important than that. And so that was what I set my sights on, jumped in my car at age 18 and moved here. And that was in 1994.
Man, so yeah, that's pretty crazy. That's a pretty heavy devotion to the blues scene. It's not uncommon. A lot of people don't realize it, but it's not really that uncommon in Mississippi, though, to see people who moved here specifically because that was the scene, that was where the music was still being made, here where it started. And so, if you wanted to get in it, you needed to get here. Unless you wanted to do the big like blues arena rock that like I'm not going to knock him because Joe Bonamassa, enough people already knock him for what he does, but you know, for what he is and what he does, he's good at it. There's always those guys, but like if you wanted to get down to the gritty, that stuff that was going on, the Burnside stuff, you know, I never got to meet RL, but of course I know. I think I know all of the other Burnsides at this point. I think I've met them and or jammed with all of them at this point, but I can't promise. but the Kimbros and the Burnsides and that hill country stuff that was coming out of Holly Springs in that area and the Oxford area, you had to get here. You had to be here because you weren't going to find that anywhere else.
No, just maybe when they hit your town once a year, you know, on a Fat Possum Juke Joint Caravan or something, but. No, I mean, for me, like, the scene at juniors, I mean, that was really my end goal anyway, was just to go out there and be part of that every weekend. And it was just amazing, you know, learning from them and you know, and then the backup guys too. I mean, I learned so much about playing with a band. Well, really, I learned everything about playing with a band from those guys, you know, and, it was just such a amazing scene out there. Musically, it was a ton of fun. It was a party every weekend. You know, it was great. The place packed out every Sunday night. And
it's nuts. And looking back now, a ton of the musicians back when I was running sound at Ground Zero and just would go to blues things. Like I got into the blues. It's really funny. I'm from Clarksdale, Mississippi, but it took me hearing Johnny Lang on the Disney Channel to discover the blues. Because
isn't that funny? Yeah.
It's nuts. Because that was the attitude of the blues, and I'm going to talk to Roger about this when I get him on the podcast. I talked a little earlier before we were recording. You know, before Roger came to Clarksdale, it was sort of oh yeah, blues is from here. We're not really talking about that. You know, like there was a quote. Right. There was a quote that has since been taken off of our Wikipedia page. So I like to put this stuff out on Front Street and just to be real with people. There was a quote from a member of the Chamber of Commerce at a time when they were asking for more money to be put into the Sunflower River Blues Festival. They were asking for more money, and there's a quote from a guy that said, "There's no way anyone's paying money to come to Clarksdale, Mississippi to hear an old black man play guitar." Right?
Right. Goes to show what folks know. But you know, people take for granted what's in their own backyard, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I had to move to Nashville. I'll say Nashville. I moved to Murfreesboro, Tennessee to go to school at MTSU. That's where I started to hear the appreciation people had for the blues. Like that's where people appreciated where I was from, not where I was from.
That's right. You have to leave. Yeah, you have to get out of Mississippi for being from Mississippi to be something special.
Man, that's a T-shirt right there. I'm writing that down. No, nobody beat me to that. It'll be in my Teespring store this evening. So,
right on.
But yeah, so it's really
it's a strange truth. It's actually how it is. You know, I mean, it pulled me all the way from North Carolina. You know, as a fresh out of high school kid. You know, and I mean, that was, you know, just the music is so strong and so powerful, and but yeah, I think maybe, like I say, when it's in your own backyard, it tends to be taken for granted more. And who knows how I would have felt about it if I had grown up here. But you know, once you realize that it's at the roots of basically all the rest of American music, and and when I discovered that it was, the blues, Robert Johnson, Howlin' Wolf, Muddy Waters, these guys were all the primary inspirations behind the music of the Rolling Stones, behind the music of Led Zeppelin, behind, Jimi Hendrix. And those were the people that made me want to play guitar and what I was first studying. So then you find out, well, these were their heroes, and that was everything to me. Once I realized that, and then even more, great was the discovery that it was still happening, still thriving here. Not history. Because at first I thought it was all over, because everybody, all the blues guys I was listening to were dead. All the people I just named, were dead. So I thought, well, maybe just a thing of the past. But then, then finding out there's R.L. Burnside, there's Junior Kimbrough, there's T-Model Ford, there's Robert Belfour, and these guys are all alive and absolutely just playing some of the greatest music anybody's ever heard.
Yeah, and doing it at a coffee shop on a Thursday afternoon. Like,
sure.
There was, I don't think it's still operating now, but there was a coffee shop in Holly Springs, Mississippi that Junior'd play, just be there, just hanging out, just playing guitar. It's like,
right.
T-Model Ford would just roll into town and stop by the music store. I'd go buy a half pint of whiskey so he'd sit around and hang out and play guitar with us for a little while. It was the coolest community. Or like the time I got to meet Honey Boy Edwards sitting on a street corner, just sat on a bench and sat and talked to him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The world in Clarksdale, it doesn't make sense to people. That's why I wanted this podcast, is to tell like a wider audience. Yeah, there's lots of documentaries. There are lots of those things that are out there. But people, I still think there needs to be more people trumpeting just how weird and cool the Mississippi Delta and the Mississippi Hill Country and that music. And what I was going to mention earlier, like I grew up, I heard Johnny Lang, and Johnny Lang was how I really discovered B.B. King. I knew the name B.B. King, but I didn't know B.B. King. And B.B. King to this day, I still say is my number one influence. Like, I don't mock or copy, but like all the Kings are like, if you leave it up to me to build my blues cover set, I'm going to have so much Albert, Freddie, and BB that it will make you sick. You're tired of hearing it.
Right.
But
you shift all great music though.
Exactly. It's all great. But that school, I like to call it like the living room school of Junior Kimbrough and R.L. Burnside. You got so many people that have came out of that I know. Like, that's where you came from. Lightning Malcolm. That's where, obviously, all the Burnsides and the Kimbroughs that are still out there playing. Jimbo, you got Kenny Brown came out of that school of thought. And then you got other guys who, I don't know that they studied under them directly, but guys like Bill Abel still out there doing what they're doing.
Yeah. Bill Abel, I know he grew up around some of the Delta guys, like down around Belzoni, like Paul Wyan Jones and those guys.
Yeah, I first heard him with Cadillac John.
Cadillac John, right.
Yeah, he used to play in Cleveland at a little coffee shop, middle of nowhere, right next to campus. I'd go there, they'd be open till midnight, and they'd be in there playing and just killing it.
Right.
Man.
Yeah.
So,
I know. And it's funny, and this is the stuff that will pack festivals in Europe or, California or, it's, like you said, you just got to get out of Mississippi for it to be a big deal.
Yeah. They'll pack festivals. They'll go to Canada. They'll go to Europe, and they'll pack these festivals. But the majority of the people listening to my podcast right now don't know most of the names I just said.
Right.
That's the wild thing.
Go look them up, folks.
Yeah, go look these guys up. Check it out. If almost anything put out on Fat Possum Record, if you like the Black Keys and you want to find out where they got their sound from, listen to these guys we just talked about.
Check out Fat Possum. Exactly.
Yeah. So,
all of their first decade of records. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
There's Broken Hungry has a couple of things that you ought to check out. Broken Hungry
They
Records.
do.
Yeah, they've got some really good stuff.
Have good stuff.
I'm hoping to get him on the podcast. I sent him a message on Facebook, but he hadn't seen it yet. So we're going to see if I get around to getting him on here. He's just getting over COVID, so.
Oh no.
Yeah, but he seems to be doing well. So yeah, got this blues scene, got this burgeoning. You came around. You're still So you played with Jimbo, knocked down South for a while. Of course, Jimbo's still doing Jimbo. Like I can never, I never know like which musical iteration he's on at any given moment. That man,
I don't know what Jimbo does from more than week to week. You know, I mean, he wears a lot of musical hats and he changes them often, and he does it all great. You know, I mean, whatever genre he tackles, he always nails it.
Absolutely. So then you start up your trio.
Yes.
And that follows. So talk about the trio. I think you've gone through a few musicians in it. I don't know who's playing in it. I say playing in it now as if anybody's playing a whole lot right now, but
yeah, exactly. You know, it's all just sort of existing theoretically right now.
It's like the record I've been talking about recording for the last 10 years. It theoretically exists.
Theoretically exists. Exactly. I know exactly what you mean, man. The trio, the Eric Deaton Trio, I've really started that basically in the aftermath of Knockdown South. Basically, what happened was I started writing some songs, and I thought, you know, I wanted, without even that much thought of putting together a band yet, I just decided I wanted to make a record and record the songs I'd written. And that became my first record, which is called Gonna Be Trouble Here. And that was recorded, half of it was recorded by Jimbo at his Delta Recording, which was located in Clarksdale at the time.
Yep.
And the other half of it was recorded by Justin Shoah here in Oxford at his studio, Voyager's Rest. And so then I put that record out when Knockdown South was still touring hard. And once Jimbo shifted gears and started focusing more on his studio rather than touring, then that was when I decided to try to put a band together and start gigging with my, you know, doing my original music. And the very first incarnation of it was probably Kent Kimbrough on drum. Well, actually, Darren Dorton on drums. He was the drummer for Knockdown South.
Oh yeah,
and he did. Yeah, you remember Double D?
Yeah, he's a Mississippi legend, dude.
Yeah, right. And he played drums on that first record, and he played those first handful of gigs with me. Actually, the very first Eric Deaton Trio gig was at Reds in Clarksdale. I felt like, hey, there's a good place to kick off a new band, you know.
Every time.
So me and Darren Dorton and Lightning Malcolm on bass was the very first Eric Deaton Trio gig, and we played it at Red. But the band, you know, I've been a lot of people have played in it over the years. Kent Kimbrough on drums, Zach Tillotson on drums, Charles Gage on drums, on bass. Well, I'm sorry, what's that?
I said I know Zach. Zach's a great drummer.
Yes, he is. Yes, he is. He's a great drummer. On bass, I've had Justin Shoah, Tony Caldwell, Jake Fussell, and most recently Nate Robbins. And so that's, you know, the trio. It's a fluid concept. It's basically whoever answers my call and says they're there for the, you know, whoever answers the call and says, yeah, I can do it, man.
That's all. See, but, I tell people about that concept all the time, and it's like, I don't know that it happens in any other genre as much as it happens in blues. Like that's right. I can remember getting calls for a gig for somebody I've never played with 45 minutes before the gig. It's like,
right. And that happens in blues. You're right, man. You're right. That really probably doesn't happen that much. And I bet bluegrass can pull it off, because those guys can all sit down and there's that sort of common repertoire and whatnot. But there's not many genres that it works that way.
No, you get a call and you're like, hey, I got a 4-hour gig that's half an hour away from you, and it starts in 45 minutes, and I need a guitar player. Okay,
can you be there?
Yeah, can you be there? I definitely got the call once that said, hey man, my guitar player just got thrown in jail. Can you come cover this gig?
Yep, that's the blues, man.
That is it. I love it. So you do the trio, and I know a ton of these musicians. I still talk to Nate too every now and again, especially when we're talking about bass gear.
Right.
Great bass player. So you've recorded these albums. You've done this. So let's talk about, like, before shutdown. Like, what was it looking like for you gigging? How often were you able to get out there and do your thing?
We'll be right back.
This podcast is supported in part by String Joy Strings. I'm a snob, at least that's what people tell me. I'm never okay with good enough, and that's where String Joy Strings come in. They're better than good enough. They're the best. String Joy are making some of the finest strings available today right up the road from me in Nashville, Tennessee. They offer custom sets, balanced tension, coated strings, the works. If you need it, they can probably make it happen. You should be using String Joy Strings, and if you're going to order from them, you really could help this podcast out by clicking the affiliate link down in the description or show notes below. You get amazing strings, I get a little bit of that back to help the show keep going. It's a win-win situation. Get your String Joy Strings today.
You know, I was gigging, I mean, on average once a weekend, I would say, once a week. And, sometimes it would be more on one particular weekend, and sometimes the weekend would be empty. But if you average it all out, I was playing about once a week. And I teach through the week, teach lessons on weekdays at a music school here in Oxford called Roxford.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
very cool. I haven't been there since that store's been around.
Yeah, that Rockford started 5 years ago.
Okay,
and I've been with them ever since they started. And we teach kids. We teach them guitar, bass, drums, vocals, keyboards, and so we've got teachers for each of those instruments. And then we've got like a band program thing where we get them together and teach them how to play together in a group. And then it functions in semesters, and it mirrors a regular school semester. So at the end of each semester, the kids get to do a concert here in town. And in front of their parents and friends and whoever wants to come check it out. And so that's sort of the weekday gig, and then the weekend is gigging.
Yeah, or was. Again,
right, exactly, right. Speaking pre-pandemic,
yeah,
as you said,
as we talked about, we sure hope it's coming back soon.
Yes, we hope so. I've done like 3 gigs, 4 gigs. I've done 3 gigs since the pandemic started.
Man, I had one. I had a church gig. That was it.
Well, and there's a few. I mean, some places are opening back up and having bands. I've been a little hesitant to jump back into it until the vaccines start making their way around a little bit better. So, and I'd love to get one myself and be able to say, okay, I'm covered. So
same. I totally relate to that.
Yeah. But also, before pre-pandemic, I was doing 3 blues guitar workshops per year in Clarksdale at the Shack Up Inn, Hobson Plantation down there. It's called the Down to the Crossroads Blues Workshops. They're like a 5-day intensive retreat for all the people who sign up for them. And so I'm one of 5 coaches.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, one of 5 coaches that teach there. We were doing those 3 times a year and plan to bring them back as soon as conditions allow. Also, some exciting things. In 2019, I was doing some studio work up in Nashville with some records that were produced by Dan Auerbach of the Black Keys, and we did a record, Jimmy Duck Holmes, the Bentonia blues man.
Oh yeah.
We did a record of him it came out towards the end of 2019, and I played bass on that, and that was, like I said, Dan Auerbach produced and played guitar on it. Jimmy Duck obviously doing his thing. So we just sat down and basically just played a gig with Jimmy Duck in the studio. Yeah.
That's so cool.
but that record came out on Dan's Easy Eye Sound record label last October, and we just found out this past November that it's been nominated for a Grammy this year.
So, so are you now Grammy nominated, Eric Deaton?
Well, I mean, my name is not nominated, but my name is on the record. So I don't know how you.
Yeah, I don't know how that works.
That exactly.
I don't know how that works.
I have played on the entirety of a record that's nominated for a Grammy. So whatever, however you define that.
That is way too cool.
If it wins, I'm try to find out if I get one of those cool little awards to sit on my shelf.
Right, that is too cool. I like that. I've always told people my loftiest ambition is to be able to introduce myself as Grammy nominated something. I don't care what it is. I don't care what category. I don't care. Like, that's life ambition. Grammy nominated.
Well, nominated is about as good as winning anyway, because I mean that means 1 out of 5 in whichever category you're 1 out of 5.
Yeah, that's pretty. So that's pretty steep odds.
Pretty great.
And a lot of people don't realize, especially in a genre like the blues, a lot of people don't realize how many records come out in that genre every year. They think of it as a dead genre.
That's true. There are a lot of blues records coming out all the time.
All the time. I know, like, for example, Galia Volt just put one out that's getting some acclaim. I don't know if you've gotten a chance to hear her yet. But
I'm sorry, say again.
Galia Volt.
No, I'm not familiar.
I meant to mention her earlier when you talked about that allure of Clarksdale. She's I'm going to get this wrong, and she's going to be so mad at me. She's either German or Austrian. I can't remember now, and she's going to be so angry. But European. We'll blanket it. Came over to Clarksdale. Came to a couple of the jams I was hosting at Ground Zero. Ended up moving to New Orleans. Put out a record. Now she's recorded this one-woman band record that, from what I've heard, sounds friggin' great. And she's living in the Mississippi Delta now, It's just one of those weird ties. It's one of those weird draws of people coming over.
Coming all the way from across the ocean, man.
Right.
Yeah.
But there are hundreds of blues records coming out every year. I wish I had a count. I wish I could give an accurate number. This is how many we average a year. But there's so many, it's impossible. There's no way.
Right.
And that definition of blues is so broad. It's like saying the best rock record. It's like, okay, whatever.
Right.
It's like, let's narrow that down to one genre.
Right. Exactly. And the blues does have 2 categories as far as I know, and this one is up for the best traditional blues album, and then there's best contemporary blues album. I think that's the 2 categories. Yeah,
that makes sense. They may as well call it best blues rock album and the best blues album, but whatever. That's just me being salty.
Right. I hear you.
That's really what they're saying. That's they had to give the blues rock guys somewhere to go. No disrespect to anyone who's ever been nominated in that category. I enjoy those records, but that's really what it is. If we get real about it, I'm not disrespecting. I love blues rock. I'm not one of those guys who hates on any variation of the genre.
Right.
So.
If it's good music, it's good music.
Exactly, man. Exactly. If it's good music, just enjoy it. You don't have to nitpick it. Just let people enjoy things. Just let people be happy. So, I was gonna transition to a different category, but then you brought up Dan Auerbach, and I've been listening to some other podcasts and some other interviews with people that recorded records with him. And I'm curious on your take. Like, they talk about that he's like a different animal in the studio than you're sort of used to. Like, he's very creatively different. Did you experience any of that, or was it pretty straightforward?
Well, he's definitely very creative with what he's doing at all times. I would say different from other studio experiences. I mean, almost everything I've ever played on is a blues record, whether it's with Dan Auerbach or Jimbo Mathus' studio or wherever, And there tends to be kind of a similar thing there as far as how they're done, which is, you've got the front man, you've got the lead man, whoever that is, and that's whose name the record is going to be in this case, Jimmy Duck Holmes. And so, he comes in and does his thing, and everybody else falls in behind that and tries to, be part of whatever that sound and that vision is, and just accentuate that as much as possible. And that's what the approach for this record was too. So I wouldn't say it was that different overall as far as how it was done, but Dan had some really cool ideas for some riffs to put in a couple of the tunes to add something that kind of countered what Jimmy was doing with his guitar. Dan was like, "Hey, what if you and me doubled this?" And he'd play a line on the guitar, and then I would double that then on the bass as well. So there's a couple of places where you can hear me and him doing this in sync guitar bass line that adds like sort of a second movement to the overall groove.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
And yeah. And the drummer on the record basically was just four people. It was Jimmy, Dan, myself, and the drummer, Sam Baco, who is not who you would think of for a blues gig. He's the lead percussionist for the Nashville Symphony.
Really?
He's a classically trained guy, but he can sit down and do anything. And he also owns a drum and percussion store in Nashville, and so he's just got this endless supply of congas and rattles and chimes and just all sorts of things. So Dan had him bring in a lot of those different things just to add some different percussion textures to the record, because this is the first time that Jimmy's really done much in the way of playing with a band. He's a solo guy. He's used to just sitting down with his guitar and singing, maybe having somebody blow some harp with him, and that's about it. But so this is kind of a different, if you listen to the other Jimmy Duck records, it's definitely a different sound. But it's still his sound, but it's his sound with, a full kind of
much fuller sound
behind it.
A lot of that groove that honestly gets lost on records from some of those hill country guys, and the that groove blues style, or the kind, I don't besides calling it hill country, and some people don't know what I mean, I've discovered people genuinely don't know the difference between, say, Chicago, Texas, Mississippi Delta, hill country.
Right.
They don't get it. That hill country blues it's, and of course Jimmy Duck Holmes is Bentonian blues. That's its own thing. It's like
its own thing, right?
It's its own little pocket of blues style, but it's still very very groove based. It's very and live that translates.
It's not your typical 12 bar. It's not your typical 12 bar. There's like zero. I don't think there's a single 1-4-5 on the whole record. It doesn't have that sound. And luckily, I grew up being seriously into Skip James and Jack Owens too. So I was already familiar with that sound and those traditional Bentonia songs like Must Have Been the Devil and Cypress Grove. That's the name of the record, incidentally, Cypress Grove.
And see, I grew up on what maybe some people normally think of. I grew up when I did discover the blues, the B.B. King stuff, the T-Bone Walker stuff, the Muddy Waters, and John Lee Hooker starts to edge into it a little bit sometimes, but he's not quite there. But live, that stuff translates, but sometimes on record, you can't capture it unless you add the band behind it. Like acoustically, it doesn't quite translate the way it does live.
Yeah, it has a different effect, and as much as I love playing acoustic blues, that style, when it comes to performing live, I generally prefer to play with the trio because, a lot of times people talk through an acoustic set and or a solo set. It's sort of like they're quick to treat it as background music, and But you bring in a band with a strong rhythm section, and people have to pay attention or either leave.
Yeah, I used to refer to my acoustic gigs as music to be ignored by.
Right.
That's because that's what it feels.
It's unfortunate, man. I hate that it works that way, but that's just how audiences seem to tend to respond, unless you're lucky enough to be in a solo acoustic guy performing in a theater or something.
Right,
and
right.
Then you'll have a nice attentive audience.
But if you're in a bar or a restaurant, good luck and God bless.
Exactly. Because particularly in bars, clubs, people are looking to party, and I mean, I don't see any reason people can't party to a solo acoustic if you bring the jams, bring the power and the groove. I mean, it's easy to forget that that's what all the original blues guys did anyway. They were almost all rocking a house party with an acoustic guitar.
Exactly, and maybe a harmonica player and their feet to stomp on the floor.
Feet to stomp on the floor, man. They made so much sound just like that. But nowadays, people, people are spoiled by bands and the power of a drum set and amplified instruments. So it's kind of, if you want to carry the party, you got to kind of bring that.
Yeah, you got to amp it up a good bit. Well, speaking of getting it louder, one of the coolest things, like, you have some of the coolest taste in guitars, and so I gotta talk about gear a little bit, because I know that a lot of the people that listen to this podcast are gearheads, mostly, more than they are even music people or blues people. They're gear people. So let's talk about. Right. I distinctly remember you playing an airline guitar, if I remember correctly.
It's not an airline. A lot of people think that's what it is. It's a Taisco, Japanese guitar.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's the one that I've used the most at gigs is it's a Spectrum 2, Taisco Spectrum 2, and it's from the late '60s. It's from they were only made in like '68 and '69, so it's from somewhere in there. And it's just a crazy guitar that I found. There used to be a store in Water Valley, Mississippi, that was run by Bruce Watson of Fat Possum and his wife, and it was called Blue Heaven. And his wife was responsible for the clothes and the antiques, and Bruce was in charge of the records and the instruments and amps.
That's awesome.
And it was a great store, man. I wish it was still there, but because I used to buy records there and instruments, and gear. It was a great little spot. But anyway, that was where I found that Taisco one day. It was hanging on the wall, and I had no idea what it was. It actually has a K logo on the headstock. It doesn't say Taisco anywhere on the guitar, because K was the one who was importing them back in the day. So they were importing them from Japan and then slapping their K logo on the headstock.
Yeah, just sticking their logo
so
on
all
it.
I knew was that it was a K guitar, and so I plugged it in and played it, and just it played great, it sounded great, it looks crazy, and so I bought it that day on the spot, and it's been my main guitar ever since. And since then, once I found out what it was, looked it up, found out it was a Taisco and all that, I've since got a couple of more Taiscos that I've added, but they're not the same model. So I've got a couple of different models of Taiscos that I play.
Right now, most of the guitars, and this is about your gear, but I will say most of my guitars are very modern. They're like, Gibsons and Fenders, but I'm on a kick now where I'm probably about 10 years too late to get these at a decent price, but I'm on a kick now where I want some of those like obscure, like crazy. Yes, I'm probably going to have to put some work into them to make them really playable kind of guitars. But I want something with that unique sound. That's something that, like, yeah, it might be a little unreliable, but nothing sounds like it.
Right. And that's the way this one is. But actually, this one, I was lucky, man. It was in good shape. It was the Spectrum 2 I later found out was like the Spectrum line was like Tysko's high-end line. That was like their guitars that they made sure that they built well and that they played well and that they lasted. Because, you know, a lot of people think of them as like cheap, you know, barely playable things,
Sure,
especially
department store
being
guitars.
right, yeah, especially being that they're as old now as they are. You know, you try to pick them up, and some of them that's definitely true. But the Spectrum was like that was like their high end. That was their Cadillac, and so I just got lucky that was the one I found hanging there in Blue Heaven. But it's actually been a very reliable. I've had a little work done on it, but it's been a very reliable guitar.
That's awesome. And so I think I remember the last time we talked, which is, like I said, been a good minute, but you were playing it through, and I'm not even gonna attempt the model name because I used to know it, but I don't know it anymore. It was basically a Fender Twin with a 15, wasn't it?
You're exactly right. Yeah, it's called a Vibrosonic Reverb.
That's it.
And yeah, a Fender Vibrosonic Reverb, and it's apparently a early '70s amp. I think maybe the first ones were made in like '69, and I'm not sure exactly what year mine is, but anyway, I think they stopped making them around '73.
Okay.
So it's from right in that. It's from right in that range.
It's my favorite years of
you're
Fender.
right. What's that?
Those are my favorite years of Fender amps, right there in that 69 to 72. I know everybody talks about the blackface era, but I think that's the era, especially right now for cost to what you're getting. You're not beating it.
Right. Yeah, like I could afford this amp.
Yeah, in fact,
I bought it. I bought it from Ronnie Drew in Clarksdale.
Yeah, I was actually going to say, I'm pretty sure I was hanging out in the shop the day you bought that, actually.
Really?
I'm pretty sure I was there because I remember that amp being in the store, and I remember you coming in, and I'm pretty sure I remember you the day you bought that amp. I was there.
Oh, wow, that's a trip, man. I'd forgotten that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, no, because I used to spend way too much time in that store.
It's a great place. Yeah, I mean, and that was years ago, man. I want to say I bought this in about 2004.
Yeah, that sounds about right. It's because I moved back from Murfreesboro in 2004 and started hanging out at the store there.
There you go.
Because I moved back and I was starting to, what was I do? I'd moved back and I wasn't in school. I was starting to work, just make a living and play gigs. That's what I was doing, working and playing gigs.
Nice.
So I was hanging out at the store when I wasn't doing one of those two things.
Right. Yeah, it's a great store, man. I love his place, and he's a great guy. So yeah, and you know, it was something that I could afford, and I'd never heard of a Vibrosonic before either. It was sort of like the Tyco. I just walked in, saw it, plugged into it, and that 15-inch speaker, man, I just love the fullness, the like powerful bottom that it has, you know, for a guitar amp.
Yep.
And yeah, so that's been my main amp mostly ever since. For a handful of years, I also acquired a Silvertone Twin 12, you know, from the one of those 1960s.
Yeah.
Silvertone Twin 12s, and
I'm curious, where'd you buy that one? Do you remember?
I bought it from Jay Lang. I don't know if you know Jay Lang.
I don't think I do. I was hoping you'd say it was
guitar player. He used to do a lot of grungy hill country blues inspired music, and he was here in Oxford he's from Greenville originally, but I think most of his music life was here in Oxford. And so anyway, Jay had that amp, and so I bought it from him, and I've still got it, but now it's just a practice and studio amp. I'm not gigging with it anymore because after maybe a year or so gigging with it, I saw that it wasn't going to make it. It was gonna get destroyed because they're made out of like the cabinets like particle board or something.
Yeah, it's real cheap.
Yeah, they're not designed for the tough, being in the back of a van, lugging in and out of clubs and all that. And I thought it was going to eventually just crumble. I retired it from gigging before that happened.
I had one of those for a while when I had gotten it in while I was in Murfreesboro. I had a friend of mine who literally found it in a closet and was like, "Hey, dude, you play guitar. You want this?" Yes. Yes, I do.
Yeah, thank you.
I did. I actually ended up, I think I had a similar revelation with that amp, was that it wasn't rugged enough for what I needed to do. And
right.
I didn't have have anywhere to really put a bunch of backlog of amps. So I think I ended up trading it into Ronnie for, God, I don't even remember, man, at this point, but I sold it in or traded it into Ronnie and he sold it. It didn't take very long for that amp to move out of the store. So.
Sure. Right. Exactly.
That's super cool.
Yeah, mine's not going anywhere. I'm keeping it. I'm just not going to gig with it anymore.
Yeah, I've got
I love it. I actually use it. I use it almost entirely on my second record, Smile at Trouble. I only used some other amps once or twice. The Vibrosonic that you're asking about, I used more on my first record, but I was doing the Silvertone on the second one.
There's something about 15-inch speakers and 10-inch speakers. I can't decide if it's me just being contrarian because 12s are like the go-to guitar speaker, but I love the sounds of 10s and 15s.
Yeah. The 15 for me is my favorite. I mean, it's just so full, and it gives a tone that nothing else does, really.
Yeah, no, nothing like it. Even those what is it? The Peavey ones that had the 15s, the Delta Blues. Was that the Delta Blues?
You're right, man. The Delta Blues has a 15, sure does.
Those things sound so good too.
Oh, they do. They sound great. And I also have a classic 30 that I use quite a bit, which is a 12, and I think it sounds great. I love the classic 30.
Oh yeah, basically, if it was a Peavey amp covered in tweed, they sounded good. I don't care what anybody said about the brand.
They did. They did, and they do. And they're reliable too. You know,
they really, really are. Especially that classic series. You could throw those things. Walt Busby used to play one that I swear looked like it had a nuke dropped on it, and he played and carried that thing out. It showed more wood than it did tweed by the time he stopped playing it. So
right,
that was crazy. So, what about, and I know you've never been like a big like pedals on the floor guy, but do you use any? Do you play with anything like that?
I actually don't use pedals at all.
I didn't think you did.
If there's anything, I suppose there's something, and it kind of happened. It happened not by design so much as by just being broke and not really, at first, just being broke and not really having the money to pay for extra stuff, extra gadgets. I was pretty simple, but plus, most of my heroes were just guitar straight in the amp guys. Now, definitely not all of them because, going back to my earliest influences, obviously, like Jimi Hendrix is one of my absolute heroes, favorites, and he used tons of effects, and I
actually heard it the other day.
Love what's that?
Someone said of Hendrix the other day, because the people who are really anti-pedal, they're like, Hendrix didn't need a bunch of pedals, but then you point out to them he literally used every pedal that was available in the time that he was alive. Because there just weren't many.
He was all about the pedal, and I love some guys like I'm a big fan of old 70s Funkadelic, Eddie Hazel and Gary Scheider and all those great guitar players were in that band, and they used tons of effects and pedals. But, I guess for the most part, most of my heroes are blues guys, and that's just how I grew up playing anyway. Nobody was using pedals out at Junior's Juke Joint, and, and that's just, I think there's something special about just taking the guitar, plug it into the amp, and the sound that comes from it is just your fingers, the guitar, and the amp, and that's it. And but I'm not anti-pedal. Like I say, I just don't prefer to play them with them myself. But I love lots of players that use lots of pedals.
Oh yeah.
It's just when I'm up there playing, that's what I prefer.
And you're a fingers, not a pick guy, right?
I am a finger picker, yeah. I have been for just about the entire time I've been playing. I started with the pick, and one day I read an interview in a guitar magazine with Hubert Sumlin, And they said, they came to the question, well, Hubert, what's the secret of your sound, your tone? He said, well, I don't use a pick. I use my fingers. And I went, okay. I tossed my pick out, never used one. I've never used one since. But and then after I did that, I discovered that most of my favorite players were finger picking, almost all of them.
Yeah, especially in the style that you play.
It's right, exactly. And so it turned out to be a good move.
I go back and forth a whole bunch with the different styles, but when I'm playing the acoustic blues, or the very few times that I've played hill country, I'm not a hill country player. I love the style, but it is deceptively difficult, especially if you don't.
That's a good.
If you don't live in it,
that would make a good T-shirt. Deceptively hill country, deceptively difficult.
It is. Like because it's not. Everybody's like, oh well, it just plays one chord for half an hour. It's not about the chord. It's about a groove. Mm-hmm. And if you can't get that groove right, stop.
Yeah, that's right. It's all about the rhythm and the riff, man. That's what it's all about.
That is, and it is deceptively difficult. I've played some gigs. I did some gigs with Bill Abel. I've sat in with Jimbo a couple of times, 100 years ago, it feels like. I actually played one. It was real fun. I played Hammond organ for Bill on a gig once. That was a lot of fun.
Oh, wow.
I'm a terrible organ player, but that was fun. I told Bill, I said, look, Bill, I can play chords and riffs behind you. Don't you look at me for a solo. Don't you dare.
Don't give me a solo.
Don't give me a solo. I can't do it. So,
well, organ's pretty awesome because you just hit a chord and it sounds great.
That's it. I'm just making this sound thicker. That's all I'm here for. I'm here to make it a little bit of a vibe. So, So I tell you what, we're getting on close to time. I don't want to keep you all night, but I do want to make sure that tell listeners where they can find you, where they can find your music, and don't just tell us where they can stream you. Where can they buy your music? Because we all know streaming don't pay shit. So it's a great way to get your music out there.
Thanks for pointing that out. Yeah, right. Because I think a lot of people don't realize that it doesn't pay shit. And so my CDs are available on Amazon. You can look them up there because I've got them through CD Baby, so that's how they're out there, and that's how they're on the streaming platforms as well.
Cool.
Best thing, man, come to a show. Come out. You see me play it, and of course, obviously, we've got a little while to wait before that happens. But I've always got my CDs there with me at the shows, and I put them out there. Justin Chouai has Hill Country Records, and so they're available on his website there as well, and you can look them up there. So that's a way to get physical copies, and I mean they're in, you can find them in stores around here and there. There's some. There should be some at the Shack Up Inn in Clarksville. I think there's probably some at Cathead, Roger Stoley's store.
Oh, cool. And Cathead does mail order, so if anybody wants to get them that way, they can get them through Cathead for sure.
There you go.
I'll make sure that I get links down in the show notes for. Do you have a website?
Yes, ericdeatonmusic.com. Although it's, I'll warn people, it's a work in progress. It's really not. It's
so, like mine.
I am not a techno savvy guy at all, and so it's kind of like halfway built. But yeah, it's ericdeatonmusic.com. All
right. So I'll make sure there's a link there. I'll get links for your social media. If you'll send me those links and your Amazon links and in our Facebook chat, I will get those up in the show notes so people can just click and find you and know where to track you down and hear your music.
Cool.
All right. Well, folks, I think we're wrapping this up. I'm going to do a little housekeeping here. Remember that you can email the podcast at 40wattpodcast@gmail.com. You can also call and leave me a voicemail that maybe I'll answer on the air before or after an episode, or maybe I'll just let my guest, whoever that given week is, answer the question for you. You can call 662-546-0615. Also, down in the notes, you heard in a previous episode, I've decided to start a Patreon for this podcast. There's no obligation. I'm going to try to have some extra content for Patreon subscribers. I don't exactly know what that's going to look like yet, but there is a Patreon, patreon.com/40watt podcast. Give, don't give. I appreciate you listening regardless. But what I've decided I'm going to do, because this is not my full-time gig, this isn't what I do for a living. I'm going to take 25% of the money that I get through Patreon. I'm going to donate to charity, whether that's charities like Delta Blues Museum that's giving lessons in music education and arts education to young underprivileged kids, actually all ages, or if I donate to St. Jude, which is it's a charity that I feel really close to my heart. I raise money for St. Jude every year, but I'm going to take 25% of everything through Patreon, and I'm going to donate that to charity every month. So feel free to give if you can. If you can't, the way you can support the podcast is tell your friends about us, share us on social media, rate us, and leave us a review wherever you're listening to this podcast. We'd sure appreciate that a whole bunch. But that is all I've got. Until next time, we sure appreciate you listening. Y'all have a great time. Y'all be good to each other and make some noise.
Yeah.
This episode is brought to you by the supporters of 40 Watt Podcast over on Patreon. Go over to patreon.com/40watt podcast, where for as little as $3 per month, you can help support the podcast and get every episode ad-free. For $5 a month, you'll get every episode ad-free, as well as a bonus episode every week. I can't overstate how thankful I am for the support of my patrons, and hope you'll consider joining the team and helping keep this show on the road.